What is going on, everyone? This is Dr. Josh Funk, and you are listening to the Strength and Knowledge Podcast.
What's up, everybody? This is Dr. Zach Baker of Rehab to Perform and R2P Academy, coming at you with another episode of the Strength and Knowledge Podcast. And today we've got with us Jeff Coulter, who fits the lens of kind of one of three different types of people that we bring on. One being former or current residents who are doing research, article reviews for us. Two being former students or people associated with R2P who have gone on and have done something that we feel like is worth highlighting. And Jeff fits into this third party, which is either people from a synergistic profession, health, wellness, fitness, performance, something that matches up well with what we do at R2P that we think our listeners would find value in. And ultimately just provide synergy amongst the whole community that we work within. So Jeff has a pretty interesting background, a pretty variable one, and I'm going to let him kind of dive into that. So, Jeff, I appreciate you coming on. Do you mind just giving the listeners a little bit of a background of what your current role is and what are some of the steps that got you into that role? What's your former educational background and experiences?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So my current role right now is I am the personal training leader at LifeTime Fitness in Gaithersburg. I've been there for about a year. Before that, I worked with a company called Exos, and Exos was the pioneer in human performance. So I ran what was called a Powered By location, and that Powered By location partnered with a medical outfit. We partnered with Innova Sports Performance in Fairfax, Virginia, and we basically took the branch between where rehab kind of ends and performance really needs to begin, and we brought them together. So majority of our clientele were coming off of surgery or injury of some kind, whether they were athletes or regular adults, everything from young middle school to high school athletes all the way up to a professional athlete. So we trained everything in between there. Prior to that, I was the head football athletic trainer at Catholic University, and then the head football athletic trainer at Newberry College before that in South Carolina. And then before that, I was in grad school at the Citadel getting my master's in health, exercise, and sports science. So I am dual credentialed as an athletic trainer and a strength coach, and I've been doing health and wellness in some capacity for 12 years.
That's awesome. And I think it's kind of funny when you look at a PT school curriculum, the early phases of patient care are almost identical to the athletic training curriculum, except in PT, we don't get that acute access. We don't get that, from time of injury within the 24 hours like you do at AT. But there's a tremendous amount of overlap of what ATs do and what PTs do as part of that early phase rehab. Then, when you think about the strength conditioning side of thing, I feel like that's that end stage of the performance continuum that, admittedly, if you don't have some sort of background as a PT, meaning you're not an exercise science major, or you don't have a strength conditioning degree, or just some experience in that, we touch on that in PT school, but it's not a heavy emphasis. So it's kind of cool when you get people with an AT and a strength background. Those are two areas that complement a PT role very, very well, because the PTs kind of live in that in-between of those two. And you'll have PTs that are competent with some of the more acute things if they have experience there, and you'll have some PTs that are competent with the end stage of strength conditioning if they have experiences there. But your role it's pretty unique in regards to having access and experience with both ends of that spectrum. And then you got to spend time with Exos. And which location were you at? I know you got kind of early in the game with them before they exploded and went a variety of different routes with what they offer.
Yeah, so Exos has been around since the 90s. They were founded in Arizona, and that's where their headquarters is. And then they've branched out to a couple what they called legacy facilities where they do a lot of their combine training, right? And that's where you see a lot of the Exos branded performance stuff is coming out of those facilities, especially now with combine season going on right now. I wasn't at those facilities from a working standpoint. I went and did mentorships or education. I went and saw those facilities and worked with those coaches and gained a lot of knowledge base from them. My location was in Fairfax, Virginia.
Nice.
And it was that Powered By location. Yep. So Powered By, we shared a room, which room is kind of a bad description of it because it was a massive facility, with PT. So on one wall, there were anywhere between when we started, I think there were 6 PT tables, branched all the way out to 10 or 11 tables by the time I left. And then on the other side of the room, there were 6 power racks, and we used Kaiser functional equipment. So we had Kaiser functional trainers with air. So we were driving free weight movements, whether it was dumbbells or kettlebells. We had barbell movements through the racks. Then we were using, all of your pull mechanics or rotational mechanics through those Kaiser functional trainers. And we'd use those either from a corrective standpoint, based on the athlete, or as strength and power mechanics through whatever they needed through their program. I trained the professional athletes was my main group, and then the high school athletes and the adult athletes. I trained everything in between. I would say 80 to 90% of the professional athletes that came through and trained with us came to me as a direct referral from physical therapy. And that was a relationship that I developed with all of those PTs that we worked with in the building. I was the gap where they're either their knowledge base or their equipment access, or honestly, in a lot of it is where their insurance cut them off, right? You don't see that in the professional athletes as much because the billing is done differently, but where you see that was the high school athletes and the adults that, some insurance companies will say, hey, great, you have an ACL tear, that's 12 visits. Awesome. We have a lot more work to do than what 12 visits could accomplish. So I would start to share those clients with PT. So athlete would come in, they would do their first several weeks PT only, and then they'd start working with me twice a week, and that was the minimum that I would say. Like, we can't go any less than twice a week, otherwise we're not covering all the global patterns that we need to cover. PT is really, really good at dialing into the specific, right? So we're going to look at that right knee and the things that surround that right knee, but where they lack, whether it's for a knowledge base or a time base or insurance base or equipment, is everything that athlete needs to do, right? So say you have a baseball player that tears their ACL. Well, all of the rotational components come from both sides of the hip, come through the trunk, come through the core, come through their arms and shoulders. So if we're only going to train that one knee for the first 16 weeks of them coming out, we're doing that athlete a disservice. So as the athlete got more progressive and was ready for more, I would train the entire body. I would put an emphasis on that injured side, but we balanced everything: push, pull, crawl, carry, rotate, all of those things every athlete went through from a progressive standpoint. The relationship that I built with the PTs is they set the ceiling for me. They say, hey, Jeff, can't go above this. We can't do anything more than this. Awesome. But everything underneath I can handle. So isometric, eccentrics were all there. When it came to movement skill, marching mechanics, wall drills, isolation, posture control drills, all of those are on the table right off the bat as soon as somebody can start walking.
And I think what you just alluded to is like the ideal situation. And unfortunately, not everybody functions in an environment where you have these multidisciplinary professionals all under the same roof, where there's that ease of communication. Now with your role at LifeTime, you get a variety of people that you're probably overseeing from a clientele standpoint. When you get individuals that are transitioning to you from an outpatient clinic, so say they're working with me at R2P, but they've had a membership or they've had a relationship from a performance training or personal training or whatever capacity at LifeTime, what are some things that you've seen from a communication standpoint between the PT working with the patient and the people on your staff, whether it's you or people that you have? What is necessary for that to be an ideal training environment where they're transitioning from PT over back to strength conditioning or personal training? What needs to be communicated, or what have you seen that's worked well in the past?
It's a good question. It's a tough road because of HIPAA, right?
Yeah.
So unless you have a really rock solid relationship with that physical therapist, they're not going to share what that patient is doing because they're not allowed to, right? So the communication has to go through the patient. And so I always try to over-communicate, like, hey, here's your program. Here's the 3-week phase that you're currently on. Take that to your PT and show them what we're doing, right? Because they're going to be able to see, like, oh, we're covering this push mechanic for your lower body, and we're pulling this pull mechanic for your lower body. These are the big global patterns. And that PT can then set me up for success. And then when you build those relationships, I'll bring the PT in and say, hey, why don't you come train with me once a week for free? Right? Bring you in the building, let you see what I do, what I'm capable of, how we adjust, and how we compensate for movement dysfunctions, and then how we can grow from there. And then that relationship goes to a little bit more of understanding of, hey, I can't tell you exactly what they're doing unless they sign whatever waiver they need to sign. But, hey, we're at this point, which means we can start doing these things, right? So they can be a lot more generalized in their communication. But that allows me to be, because I'm not restricted by HIPAA anymore, that I can give them a lot more information.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we have at our facility when we have people that are working with a variety of people outside of us. So maybe it's coaches that need to be in the know, or maybe if they're in a collegiate environment and there's AT staff or strength conditioning there, or community partners that we have, and they're going back to the gym that they were once at, or they're working with their strength coach. We do have a HIPAA release form that we'll have them sign that'll designate who we can communicate with. That'll help streamline that communication. And I think one thing that's worked really well for us is it's nice to talk big picture goals like, hey, Jeff, we need to get their range of motion better. We need to get their strength better. We need to increase their aerobic or anaerobic conditioning. It's nice when you can elaborate on benchmarks as well. And, hey, we're going to start running in 3 to 4 weeks with this individual. But before we do that, I need to see them hit X benchmark in the clinic. If it's a knee injury, maybe we're talking knee extension, torque to body weight ratios, or maybe we're talking limb symmetry indices with different hopping metrics or jumping metrics. But I think being able to share some sort of objective, concrete data as to what is also validating decision making, it's a common language. And when you have PTs, when you have strength coaches, and you can give them numbers and data to work off of, then it also makes it easier to reverse engineer what's appropriate. Hey, if we're not doing single leg activity until this number is hit, all right, well then I know the reason why they're not doing it. Maybe it's not a medical reason, but it's a functional limitation. It's a competency or capacity limitation. And then we can reverse engineer on either side of that party. All right, do we need to look at stance progressions? And if they can't go unilateral, maybe we're going bilateral asymmetrical, or maybe we're going just true bilateral symmetrical based activity. Or maybe they do have something that is a little bit more restrictive from a biological healing time frame. So they can't tolerate excessive load, but tempo you can modify real well. And hey, maybe I can't go over X number from an external load, but we can give them variations in tempo, and we can increase time under tension, or maybe we don't want them doing impact activity, but we can speed up tempo a little bit with some of our isotonic movements. So I think one thing that we always try to prioritize if we're giving people, like you had mentioned, kind of that ceiling and that floor of what they can operate within, also providing some of the details is like, all right, when does that ceiling get lifted? Is this something that's chronological in nature, and maybe we have bony healing timeframes that we're waiting to happen, or we have tissue healing timeframes that we're waiting to happen, and the ceiling just kind of is what it is until they hit X weeks, post-op or post-injury? Or is it more of a competency capacity-based limitation? And if all parties know what we're striving for to hit that benchmark, then we know when and what that ceiling is going to be lifted to as well. So I think that's something that admittedly early in my career I did not provide enough guidance with, and it put people in a tough situation because they didn't know exactly why somebody was being held back, and it forced them in a situation as a strength coach where they had to operate very conservatively because they didn't know what was driving the factor. And unfortunately, then you're providing a patient or a client with an underwhelming program because you're handcuffing the strength coach so much with a lack of information. Whereas if you can give them a little bit more details in regards to why the rules are a certain way, hey, this is coming from the surgeon, it's their protocol. Or, hey, this was a bony stress injury, so we're going to wait 6 to 8 weeks before we do X, Y, and Z. Or, hey, this is a grade 2 hamstring tear, so this is why we're holding back on some of these progressions. They can take that knowledge and then they can operate within their field of, all right, well, cool. If we can't increase tempo, we can do this other strength modification to still elicit results. So that's something that it's feedback that I've gotten from people, and it's feedback that I've gotten from patients as well, that I've tried to get better at. I'd like to think I'm better at over the last 10 to 12 years, but it is something that is a work in progress. In addition to just working with individuals, you manage a staff as well, which comes on with its own variety of roles and responsibilities. What would you say is the more enjoyable part of that process of your career? What is really exciting, or what are you passionate about with being a leader of a team? What is something that you look forward to doing with that? But then what are some of the areas of the job that are just they're a constant, I don't want to say a struggle, but just something that you're always trying to refine or improve upon your processes with?
Wednesdays are my staff meetings, my team staff meetings. And the way I've attacked my staff meetings is first half of it, they're an hour long, so the first 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how much we have to cover, is local and national business, right? So what is the company doing? What is LifeTime as a whole rolling out? What are our initiatives that we're moving towards in the upcoming weeks or anything they need to know? And then how does that affect our club locally, right? So, for example, starting today, today is the 27th of February. We're doing an open house for 3 days for personal training services. So we're having a lot more access to our personal trainers where they can get in for their evaluation and their complimentary training session, right? So preparing everything on the front half of that, leading them. And then the back half is the most fun for me. It's the thing that I got into when I worked at Exos, but it's the education. I have told LifeTime and I've told my general manager and the people that I work with is like that part of it is the most important, is continuing to grow their knowledge base and share things. Whether are we talking about program development, which this is the third week of our 3-week progression that we're going through for program development. Are we talking about corrective exercises? Are we talking about business development? What are we talking about from an educational standpoint that can make you better at your job, right? You see a lot of this in PTs, athletic trainers, strength coaches, where they go to a conference once or twice a year. They go to a couple things to grow their knowledge base. Well, I'm chipping away at that week over week, trying to share something that I've learned, share something that somebody else on my staff has learned, whether, I've got a guy that went and got a kettlebell certification, so he's going to teach us a couple things about movements with kettlebells and how we can either go really progressive and really advanced all the way down to like, hey, let's use this kettlebell to facilitate weight in a specific direction that's going to create a shoulder isolation, that's going to strengthen that rotator cuff, that's going to put it in a better packed shoulder position, that's going to facilitate this guy's bench press or get them out of shoulder pain that they've been dealing with for a really, really long time. So the education part of that has always been a huge passion. I see, unfortunately, a lot of stupid when you work in a big box gym. You see guys that saw something on Instagram trying to mimic it, and they get hurt or they do
That's
this.
not isolated to the gym. I see that in a lot of other professions as well.
I see that everywhere. And so, like, I jokingly will tell my staff when I see it, I was like, man, I just see a lot of stupid. And, on Fridays are one of my favorite days in the club because Friday afternoon, man, the people that are in the gym working out on Friday afternoon, those people are dedicated, right? Those people are really trying to push their body where most people are out and starting to enjoy their weekend. So I always call it Free Fitness Friday. I will walk around the club and I will just be like, hey, can I help you with that movement? Think about this. Adjust this shoulder position here. Think about this when you move through this pattern, right? Or slow that down. You're using a ton of momentum and you're not getting as much out of the movement as you should. And so to pass that knowledge base on, I love that teaching aspect. When I work with young athletes or I work with new clients or even if I have new personal trainers or strength coaches that I'm working with, the biggest thing that I emphasize is my performance pyramid, and it starts with position, pattern, and then power. And I tell them it does not matter the weight that's on the bar, the weight that's on the rack, whatever number, that does not matter. If your posture is poor and you can't get from position A to position B correctly, whether it's at the right speed or in the right direction, you're setting yourself up for injury. And if we increase the power, increase the load, we're just setting you up for more injury. We're grooving a bad pattern. We're enhancing a dysfunction that's going to lead you down the road to more of those shoulder pains or more of those knee or back pains. So correcting those things first and not being frustrated with how slow that process can be sometimes, because you're talking about cognitive learning. You're talking about someone that has no idea that they've been making a mistake for a long time and having to correct that mindset. The frustrating part of being in my role is nobody's me. Nobody carries my exact work ethic, my exact values, my exact programming, my exact anything, right? And I look at that as such a value add to our department because everybody's very different. What's right for this person is not right for the next person. But I have go-getters that are going to be in the club 10, 12 hours a day, and that's just between their workout and between the number of clients that they're going to see. They're here all the time, and I don't have that in me right now because I've got a family to manage at home as well. So I'm there less, and some things will have to be sacrificed, and I have to make those right decisions for me. On the flip side, I have other people that kind of have to step on a little bit, like, hey, why aren't you trying to grow? Why aren't you trying to impact more lives? Why aren't you trying to get those things? And that's the toughest part about being a leader and a manager, is managing all of those personalities of, hey, this person's really comfortable where they're at right now and they don't want to grow. They'll grow their knowledge base maybe a little bit, but they're not going to grow their business. They're not going to grow their clientele. And that's really, really tough, because in our field, it's always fluid. You're either growing or you're shrinking, because if you're just cool, sitting stagnant, you're going to have clients that eventually leave, and then you have to replace them. So if you're not constantly on the growth aspect, you're going to set yourself up for failure. Now, that doesn't mean we're making a quantum leap week over week, right? But like, let's get 1% better every day at a minimum. And some days we're going to get 80% better, but most days we're going to be 1% better every day than we were the day before.
Now, that's awesome. I'm glad that you touched on education being a large part of your role, but also what sounds like is a value at the organization you work with. And I think a lot of people, they love to say that they value education. They love to say that it's something that is a priority. You know it's a priority when it is scheduled on a repeatable basis and it's structured. And you hear it all the time in the PT world. That's a large driving factor that drives hiring and recruitment. People want to know, what's your mentorship process? What kind of ongoing education you have? And unfortunately, a lot of people say that they have a mentorship process, but they can't articulate what that actually looks like. And it just means, hey, we're going to hire you, and whenever we have time, like, we'll find 10 or 15 minutes to talk about a case that you had, as opposed to when you get hired, for the first 3 months, we're going to meet every Friday at 12 o'clock. And the first week, we're going to cover this. And the second week, we're going to cover this. And the third week, we're going to cover that. Then when you graduate from our onboarding process, you're going to continue to keep participating in our weekly in-services. They happen Tuesday from 12 to 1. These are the topics that we're going to cover. You can find it on this spreadsheet for the entire calendar year of what we're going to cover. And I think that's really the mark of a company that cares about educating and cares about growth. And it's kind of that age-old adage of people say, like, well, why do you want to invest so much in your people? What if they don't stay with you, or what if they don't leave? It's kind of that old saying of like, well, what if they don't leave? And what if you don't educate them? Then you're stuck with just a company that has a culture of being stagnant is okay. And unfortunately, you're going to get passed by other companies and organizations just from a quality of care and a culture standpoint. And then I also liked how you touched on knowing your staff and knowing your personnel, and you're going to have varying levels of investment from your staff. And you're going to have some people that are chomping at the bit to always learn something new, always progress themselves either personally or professionally. And professionally, whether it's their clinical skills or their skills in the workplace, or if they're thinking more business mindset, and are they having some sort of entrepreneurial mindset, or do they want to take on some sort of, I'm not sure what the titles at yours, but for us, we have site directors who lead clinics, and then we have other roles within the company that people can kind of grow into. And it's important to identify those people, because you want to build them up and you want to give them different pathways for success within their career, and make sure that they feel like they have a way to continue to stay within your organization and lead a professionally and personally fulfilling life. The other thing is, you're going to have people that are content, and there's nothing wrong with it, punching in and punching out. Tell me my roles, tell me my responsibilities. I'll do them well, but that's just kind of what I want to do. I don't really want to, I like training, or I like being a PT. I don't want to open a clinic, or I don't want to, lead and be an educational mentor, and that's fine. But like you had also mentioned, part of your role and responsibility is continuing to get better. And there is some sort of ongoing education that needs to be a part of that. And I mean, you've been going at this for a while, between your undergraduate experience, your master's education, the different certifications you've had. There's not groundbreaking research coming out every day. So it's not like just every month you can find this new groundbreaking research article that's going to drastically change how you approach patient care, how you approach training with your client. But part of ongoing education is just affirming that what you're still doing is appropriate and accurate. And we do these monthly research article reviews, and selfishly, it's part of the residency so that it filters throughout our whole company, and our company is getting access to information and staying up to date with literature. and also selfishly because I'm not really good at taking the time to read it myself. So if somebody else is reading it and articulating it for me, it checks that off my list. But it's not often that we get a monthly research article where we're like, oh my God, like I never knew that, or we need to go out and buy this piece of technology, or we need to drastically change our thought process. It's more so, hey, we've been doing rotator cuff rehab with this protocol for the last 2 or 3 years, and the current updated literature says that that's still appropriate. So we know we can move forward doing industry standard. But then every now and then you kind of get caught where it's like, oh, shoot, I've been doing this running progression or this return to throwing progression off what I learned 10 years ago in school, and there's actually some new stuff that's come out. So it's always fun when you talk about education, because part of it is just confirming that what you're doing is adequate. But then there is that piece where it's kind of that humbling of, wow, there's some more intelligent people and some more well-read people out there that they're carving the path and pioneering for us, and it wouldn't hurt to get in touch with them.
I think at this point in my career, I've been doing this long enough that like the mentality that I have anytime I go into a conference or an education seminar or something big is I want to walk in there knowing 80 to 90% of what that person has to say, right? Because I've been doing this long enough that if I walk out of an education seminar and 90% of that was new to me, I was either in the wrong room because it wasn't my field, or that person is so progressive and so different about the way they're attacking it that I would need to dive in and know more, right? That's that affirmation of like, hey, if you and I are on the same page about 80% of the stuff, and then there's 20% that I can take from that, that's excellent. And I tell my staff this when we do our education, it's like, hey guys, those of you who've been in this field as long as me or longer, right? You're going to hear most of what I say, like, yep, that's kind of what I do. I do it a little bit different. Oh, that's a good way of adding or thinking about this, right? But for the most part, yeah, I'm doing those things, right? Because we're not reinventing the wheel. When you're young in the profession, right, whether you're 5 years out of school or less, yeah, you're going to take away all that and you're going to go, oh my God, that's a ton. And the biggest thing that I have attached myself to is there's not one way to do everything, right? There is, if you look like in the news now with Aaron Rodgers in particular when it comes to Achilles, right? As far as I have ever seen, that's a year. Even at the highest levels, it's a year before you're coming back on the field. And this guy's throwing the ball on the field. Granted, he's in shoes and he's on turf, so it's not the torque and everything that's there. But he's throwing the ball 12 weeks after an Achilles tear, which is he's in a regular shoe, which is unheard of anything I've ever seen. So, one, there's the skeptic side of it of like, this is way out there, so is it even real? But on the second side is like, okay, if this is successful, this is going to drastically change the way we attack an Achilles rehab. Because not only is he a linear sport athlete, right, where he's running back and forth, he's a quarterback, so there's a rotational aspect that goes into this, right? There's the change of direction, there's the front and back, but the rotational aspect of what that puts on the Achilles is a lot for a thrower. And so to see something so drastically different, that's your quantum leap, right? That's going to change the way athletic performance rehab is done when it comes to an Achilles. We've seen that with ACLs, right? ACLs, you roll back 10, 15 years, that was a year. And now most protocols, they went all the way down to like, hey, this will be 9 months. And now they've backed off a little bit and said, no, a year's probably more accurate, right? And the tough part for any young athlete or any young person when they hear, whether you're a rec sport athlete or you're just your average Joe going to the gym, and you have a drastic injury like an Achilles, like an ACL tear, or like a rotator cuff tear, labrum, they hear like, yeah, your rehab's going to be 9 to 12 months. And the mentality that they take in when they hear that is, I can do nothing for 9 to 12 months, and that is horrible to hear, no matter who you are, right? You had vacations planned, you had seasons that you were going to go do, you have so many plans, and you hear that, but recognizing that 9 to 12 months is progressive, right? So yeah, for the first 4 weeks, you're not really doing anything, but you also don't feel like doing anything. Yep. So like that barrier is there. And then, hey, we get to do a little bit more every day, right? Whether it's doing the exact same movement, same posture, same pattern, same everything, but our volume has changed week over week. We're now doing more than we did the week before, but that's progression and that's growth, right? Or, hey, we're going to do less volume but more intensity. Now we're starting to get into the strength stuff, the later stage rehab, the more fun stuff for me, right? So we're going to progress those ways. So when you get those people that get really despair about like, hey, this is going to be 12 months, that's 12 months of progression, man. It's 12 months of growth. You got to look at it. You got to change the mindset for that patient, that athlete or something like that of how they're going to look at those things.
Definitely. And I think carving out those expectations early is huge. And then also finding creative ways to give them meaningful context to early phase rehab. And I just had a high school basketball player who she played 9 months post-operatively in her first game back. That doesn't mean for 8 months and 29 days, she wasn't doing basketball. The only reason she was playing at the 9-month mark was because at the 8-month mark, she was doing practices. And at the 7-month mark, she wasn't doing contact and competition at practice, but she was fully participating in all drills and team activities. And at the 6-month mark, she was doing conditioning at practice. And at the 5-month mark, she was doing controlled shooting drills. And at the 4-month mark, she was doing stationary shooting drills. And at the 3-month mark, she was doing ball handling. And at the 2-month mark, we were integrating the basketball with different movement patterns as part of her warm-up in the rehab setting. And at the 1-month mark, when we were doing early weight bearing and weight shifting, we were doing ball handling. We were doing dribbling, teaching her how to step onto her affected limb instead of just putting her in the open turf and having her step onto her right leg and step off of her left leg. It's, hey, step on your right leg and throw a chest pass off the wall. Gather the ball. Do it again. Do 10 stepping with your right foot. Do 10 stepping with your left foot. Cool. Now instead of stepping straight ahead, step off at a 45 and wrap a pass around with one hand. And mechanically at the lower body, it's no different than just early phase gait training. But you're also reinforcing that mindset of how do we get the whole body involved? Just if you're talking about either regional interdependence or just cognitive dual tasking or just making it more entertaining. For a 14, 15-year-old, 16-year-old person, just asking them to step back and forth 20 to 30 times is boring. But if you can give them a basketball or a football or something else, it becomes more meaningful.
Not everybody's a weight room junkie, man. Not everybody's going to be able to sit there and just rep things out and have a conversation with you.
Exactly. And it's just finding ways to make things a little bit more entertaining. And the hard part from a rehab standpoint in early phase is you have so many medical restrictions often, either with regards to weight bearing or regards to load. So a lot of what you're doing is not physically taxing. And if you have a knee injury or an ankle injury, having somebody do ankle pumps or like 4-way ankle, it's boring. It's necessary at times, but it's boring, and it doesn't really challenge them systemically. So if you can find a way to get the rest of the body involved. So I always think of like, all right, if I'm trying to drill terminal knee extension for a knee, we can have them lie supine on a table and just do TKEs into a towel, or we can get them in a high plank position and have them hold a 30-second high plank. And then we can alternate lifting a leg off the ground and give them various anti-rotational stability. Or we can have them do push-ups and just make sure the knee is in terminal knee extension. But we're still accomplishing everything we need for that knee, but we're driving some sort of other physical stimulus. And from a mentality standpoint with an athlete, if you have a hard time doing a task because you have an elbow injury or a shoulder injury, and the entirety of that task is based on let's get that elbow fully flexing and fully extending, and it hurts or they're apprehensive, that's very frustrating for an individual to go through. But if all you care about is elbow flexion and extension, and you can have them do a rowing or a pressing or a carrying or a pulling pattern, you're still getting whatever flexion or extension demands you want, and now it's only a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
So mentally, they may not be as apprehensive. From a physical exertion standpoint, they're doing something more physically tasking, and you're actually still getting whatever that more remedial either range of motion or positional tolerance you're trying to get as well. So it's fun. There was another PT in the field. I heard Seth Ober say it one time. I don't know if it's his quote or somebody else's, but he always talked about like provide that hidden curriculum, and you're trying to get them to do a task that you care about through an activity that they want to do. And whether or not they actually know what you're trying to get out of it, put them in a safe-to-fail environment, give them some sort of task or external constraint or cue to perform it, and just make sure it's still accomplishing whatever your underlying goal or theme for that session is.
Yeah, it's a good way of looking at it. I because I've been a strength coach for so long, I always look at challenging the athlete. And I had a young lady that I worked with that tore her ACL. She had tore her ACL. She ran track. So we got her ready for track, all linear stuff, just working on a little curvilinear coming around the bend, but she could handle it no problem. And it was coming to lacrosse season, and she was apprehensive for whatever reasons, didn't want to be involved with the team, but thought she was just good enough that when she was cleared, she cleared to walk back on the field. And unfortunately, she had another tear. She wasn't ready. Physically, she was ready. She passed all the drills, all the prerequisites, all the testing, but she just wasn't ready. And then she had another tear. And when I was working with her, she was really down in the dumps because she was coming up on her junior year, which from a recruiting standpoint is about the most important year for most athletics, right? Sophomore, junior year, and in high school. And I told her, I said, you know what, yeah, you're going to be down again for a while, but you can do wall ball drills. You can do all the stick handling that you want. And so when you come back from your ACL, your hands better be better than everybody on the team because you've had nothing to do but mess with your hands for the last 9 months, right? And then that coordination and that skill and that control challenged her that she was always doing something. And then, okay, so now run with a stick in your hand, right? And so the stick was so natural, it was already meant to be there, that the stick handling was so good. She, coming off of an ACL tear, signed at the University of Cincinnati to play lacrosse in the next couple of years. So the progression is there. And then with an athlete like her, and so a lot of the DOD guys that I used to work with, the other thing, and you brought it up earlier, and I'm circling back to it, is pain. Pain, the way you look at it. A lot of people will look at pain as, oh, that hurts, so I shouldn't do it, right? And pain is your body's warning signal, right? So when you're driving around in your car, and all of a sudden you get a check engine light on your car. Well, you don't know what the problem is. You just know your car is telling you, hey, there's a problem, right? What do most people do when they see that engine light? I'm going to ignore that for the next 3 months, right? And then the engine starts making a sound, right? And then eventually you're on the side of the highway with your hood up and smoke pouring out of it because you've ignored all the warning signs. So if you can look at pain as a warning sign of something in that pattern is not right. So my body is sending me the warning signal that this is going to cause damage moving forward, right? Whether it's a subtle damage or it leads to a bigger failure. Address the pain now so we can have pain-free movement through all of training. Now, through rehab, some of it's going to hurt, right? When we're working on early stage range of motion, knuckle down, bud, this is going to hurt. But after that, when we start about strengthening patterns or we start about adding more complex patterns, those should never hurt. And if you're getting pain, your job as the clinician, your job as the coach, is to turn around and say, why is that pain there? Do they have a lack of stability? Are they just tired, right? And now the glutes are shutting off, so the quads are taking over, and therefore we're turning into a lot of anterior knee pain, right? It's just because we're tired. It's not because there's a problem. We just ran out of gas. And the glutes are expensive to use, and when they get tired, they shut down, and we have to move on to something else. So recognizing pain for what it is I think is the biggest job of a clinician, because that's your warning sign. That's telling you where you're going.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If people want to get in touch with you or just learn more about you, what is the easiest way for them to contact you?
My best method is email. I'm always responsive to email. So Coulter, so JCOULTER @lt.life. That's my email address. That'll get me connected with any of you, whether it's want to come train with us or talk about education moving forward. I'm also on Instagram at JCoulter7. You should be able to find me on Instagram through there. You can DM me there, and I'll get you guys connected with whatever I can help you with moving forward.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, I appreciate you taking the time to come out. And for anybody listening, stay tuned for our next episode, which will feature another one of our research article reviews from our residents.
Thank you for listening to the Strength and Knowledge Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode or have been tuned in for multiple episodes, we would love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Until next time, thanks for listening.